He didn't speak the language. He didn't know the culture. He only knew how to work. The night he stepped off the bus in a foreign city, everything felt larger than life and colder than he expected. The streets moved fast, the faces were unfamiliar, and every sound around him felt like a reminder that he didn't belong. In his pocket, there was only $40, folded and worn from being counted too many times. It wasn't just money, it was everything he had left of home, of family, of a life he could no longer return to. He had come chasing a promise, whispered through letters and distant conversations, the promise that in this country, hard work could turn anyone into something more. But standing there under flickering streetlights, he realized that dreams didn't come with instructions, and survival didn't wait for confidence. The first nights were the hardest. He slept in places that weren't meant for sleeping, ate what others left behind, and learned quickly that hunger was not just physical, it was emotional, constant, and humbling. Yet every morning he woke up with the same thought: he could not go back. He found work where no one else wanted to work. Kitchens that were loud, hot, and chaotic became his classroom. He didn't understand the language shouted across the grills, but he understood urgency. He didn't understand the jokes exchanged between chefs, but he understood timing. So he moved faster than everyone else, cleaned longer than everyone else, and stayed later than everyone else. At first, people saw him as invisible, just another pair of hands to do the dirty work. But invisibility became his advantage. While others talked, he observed. While others complained, he memorized. He learned how dishes were made, not by asking, but by watching 100 times until every movement made sense. His hands began to understand what his mouth could not yet express, and slowly, something changed. The same people who once ignored him started calling his name. Not because he spoke their language perfectly, but because he had become someone they could rely on when pressure hit its peak during the busiest hours of the night. Years passed like that, one shift blending into another, until the kitchen was no longer just a place of survival, it became a place of mastery. He learned how to control fire, how to balance flavor, how to turn simple ingredients into something people would line up for. But more importantly, he learned how kitchens were not just about food, they were about emotion. Every plate carried a story, every dish carried a memory, and every customer was searching for something they could not always name. That understanding stayed with him long after he left those early jobs. He was no longer just working to survive, he was building something in his mind, something bigger than himself. People around him began to notice the shift. The quiet worker who once stood in the corner was now asking questions about costs, about suppliers, about how businesses were run. Some laughed at him, saying he was dreaming too far beyond his place. But he had already lived too much struggle to be discouraged by opinions. One day, an opportunity came that looked more like risk than reward. A small, forgotten restaurant space was available in a part of the city people avoided. It was broken down, nearly empty, and most called it a failure before it even began. But to him, it wasn't a failure, it was possibility. With every dollar he had saved and a courage built from years of hardship, he signed papers he barely understood and stepped into ownership of something that was finally his. The first days were almost identical to his past long hours, no customers, and uncertainty pressing heavily on every decision. There were moments when doubt crept in, when he wondered if he had traded security for another kind of struggle. But then he returned to what he had always known: work. He cleaned, he cooked, he improved, and he refused to let empty tables define his effort. Slowly, something began to shift. A few customers turned into regulars. Regulars turned into word of mouth. And word of mouth turned into lines outside the door. What made his restaurant different was not luxury or decoration, but authenticity. Every dish carried the discipline of his past kitchens and the soul of his journey. People didn't just come to eat, they came to feel something. They tasted food that had been refined through years of struggle, patience, and silent learning, and as the restaurant grew, so did he. He hired people who reminded him of his younger self, those who were overlooked, underestimated, but willing to learn. He treated them not as workers, but as future builders. Because he understood something deeply now. Success was not just about what you built for yourself, but what you made possible for others. Years later, that single small restaurant became the foundation of something much larger. New locations opened. Lines grew longer. Critics began to write about him. Investors who once would not return his calls now asked for meetings. Yet he remained the same in the ways that mattered. He still arrived early. He still checked the kitchen. He still believed that the heart of any empire was not the brand, but the discipline behind it. When asked about his journey, he never spoke about luck or talent. He spoke about nights without food, mornings without hope, and the decision to keep going when quitting would have been easier. And always, he returned to the same truth he had lived since the beginning. He didn't need to speak the language of opportunity to build it. He only needed to work until the world had no choice but to understand him.